controversial issue. Women must have land in where to grow food. But how are they going to access that land? We have to look at ways and how we can ensure that they get land. Land in Uganda now is rising at a very, very high rate. And sometimes you have the land and you can't sell it because somebody is not giving you the right price. So we have to ensure to ensure about the rights and how to have those rights realized. If they have to grow, let them have the land. If they have to have the land, let them have the titles to it, let them own it. So we have to find ways of helping them to earn and own and ensure that they enjoy the rights. We keep talking about them having rights, but how can we find the ways and means of the how so that they can be self-sufficient? Then there is the issue of the forests. The women keep going to get firewood to cut and stock and use in their endeavors. Can we give them stoves and other ways so that the forests which are planted can stay? Because they plant, but they are being cut at a very, very high rate. It is like giving with one hand and taking away with the other. So can we have technological advances in these rural areas so that they can use them and promote agriculture? And then we can have the food security. That is a very important aspect for international institutions to look at, so that what is there can remain, then what we add on can make the balance. But where is the funding? Where is the funding?
I think in that context, just want to inject one thought as well, particularly as it relates to the funding decisions. And Marie was putting up the example of the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, and the fact that funding decisions there are made in a more participatory way, in the sense that local communities, beneficiaries, civil society is represented. Now, we are on the verge of designing a global climate fund, which will have a significant role in multilateral adaptation, mitigation, and financing for REDD, for forest conservation. According to the Cancun Agreement, the majorities of the multilateral funds for adaptation are supposed to be flowing through that clean climate fund. And again, we heard of the relevance of agriculture or agriculture-related funding in that context. So I think it's very important that the Green Climate Fund, as it's going to be designed over the course of the year through a transitional committee, and there is the hope that civil society will play a very strong role in having a say how that design process is going to go forward, but will be designed in a way that takes into account and gives a place at the decision-making and funding decision-making table for not only civil society at large, but also project-based for affected local communities, including women. And so, for example, a designated seat for women, quote-unquote, as one of the affected groups, similarly to indigenous people who usually get a very specific representation, I think is crucial. Just again, to keep in mind the intersection of development and climate finance, and I'm probably really not going to be able to differentiate that much going forward, particularly also because a lot of the climate financing, unfortunately, is accounted towards the official development assistance and not additional, as most of us would like to see it. We have 2 or 3 more minutes. I know there was one very urgent intervention, and if somebody else would like to comment or ask a question, now would be the time to indicate that you want to do it. Okay, then.
I'm really pleased to be here because I know how much work you've been doing over the years to get this organization moving up. And my question is that this particular set of sections of the bank has a lot of civil society engagement in it. and it's really come up more to the fore as being a principal partner with the bank. But when the early part, when you were talking about saying that while the IFI, does the gender analyses and other things prior, but there's no follow-up in terms of the data to see if you've been successful. Am I misinterpreting that? I mean, I'm just trying to get a handle on how good is the bank today with their work in gender. And not because that they're not doing some work on gender, but you're talking about the gaps. And is there something civil society should be organized around that in over the next couple of years?
That's what we've been doing for 10 years.
No, you have.
Gender action.
I know.
Going after the bank to try to do things like do better monitoring and evaluation.
You've been knocking yourselves out.
Yeah. That's what we continuously do.
Why don't we give the panelists a chance to respond to that one?
How to take it further.
Sure.
Good
point.
I've analyzed now 72 projects in sub-Saharan Africa that focus solely on HIV and reproductive health that are funded by both the World Bank and African Development Bank, and I actually see quite a range of quote-unquote mainstreaming or gender integration, and some of them would leave me so depressed leaving the office at the end of the day, and some of them would just have me walking on air. Some of them actually do meaningfully incorporate women and men in the discussion around the project design. They have gender disaggregated indicators. I mean, some of them are really spot on. I really think it depends on the hands in whoever's handling the project. When I was in Uganda and I met with Dr. Peter Okwero, who's the senior advisor for health
In the World Bank?
in the World Bank for Uganda, in the Uganda office. I asked him if he received any gender training, and he said no. I said, has anyone else in your office received gender training? No. They have one gender person, and of course she's a woman, and she's in charge of everything related to gender and community, and she signed off on all of the projects that the World Bank funded in Uganda, and she said that they were adequately gender mainstreamed. I said that wasn't enough. We had to agree to disagree on that. But I mean, I really do think it depends. I've seen some projects that are close to what we would want. That if you look at this checklist, we used Gender Action's Essential Gender Analysis checklist to see the degree to which these projects integrated gender issues, and some of the projects got close. And I don't think you would have seen that 5 years ago. I don't think you would have seen that 10 years ago. They just weren't. Right. They weren't talking about gender at all. So I don't mean to discount. I mean, they.
I'm not. I think it's great that it's moved forward, and with all the work in these last 5 years and before those, making an institution as complex as a bank really be able to deliver on so many levels is bound to have its ups and downs. But I do think it's amazing to see how much has been accomplished. But my question was kind of about what's still out there is the big things we need to think about to continue to.
Well, I think what's left is matching the rhetoric to the money. They're coming out with Gender WGR in 2012, and it's great that they're focusing so much attention on it. For all of you who are interested, we are having a discussion later this afternoon at 1875 Connecticut Avenue, where Gender Action's offices is based. The discussion will take place at 4 p.m., and we'll be discussing the Gender WGR. But where are the investments? The investments have gone from 6% of the World Bank total budget in 2005 to 1%. And yet the World Bank is saying that gender is a major focus, and you can't have development without gender equity. Mm-hmm. Where's the money? Show me the money. That's the next step.
I had two people from the audience who wanted to briefly jump in.
Yeah, I'm Nadia from the Bank Information Center. What I wanted to know is that it's great to hear that there are some projects that are meeting the checklist that Gender Action has for seeing if women are being incorporated into the participation aspect of projects and that kind of thing at the World Bank's project level. And I'm wondering, for those projects that have adequately met those checklists, if you've seen different development impact results in those particular
we can actually see if there's been any meaningful difference. Like Elaine said, and actually Dr. Peter Okwero admitted this too, the uniform problem with all investments is that they're so short. That I don't think you can really count on meaningful long-term impacts at this point. But baby steps. The important thing right now, is that women, and I'm talking about a handful out of 72, I'm talking about maybe 3 or 4 maximum, that at least women are becoming more part of the discussion, that at least that, gender issues are being incorporated into monitoring and evaluation. So it's a start, but there's a long way to go.
Debbie from Literacy Bridge, I really appreciate the big picture overview and the policy work that you all are doing. For those of us who are on the ground, and maybe even for people at the policy level, I think there's a great lack of knowledge about what gender is. And the example for that is a week-long training that we did in Liberia with a rights-based approach and a very diverse group. And at the final dinner, a man stood up and raised his glass and said, "Let gender prevail." And, it just pointed to how, so what's your little thumbnail when, to people on the ground who don't have literacy, who don't have formal education, what's gender? Define, do you have a simple thumbnail? I think it's rights and power relations between men and women. Those two things.
Whatever.
At which point, what does a...
Social and cultural norms that shape how men and women interact, how the power relationships between men and women, access to resources are actually shaped.
But we're also very careful to note that gender does not equal women. If you were to ask the World Bank, I think they would more than likely say gender equals women. If you look at their social impacts section of their appraisal documents, it's always about women. We believe in gender equality too. It also has to do with equality and equity issues.
No, you've done a great job in advancing the dialogue, but still, the woman smallholder farmer looks at you and says, "Oh, the power and cultural relationships are not something that she's had any background. She knows it, but it's not something she can speak about, generally." So,
but she can speak about how she is affected by, for example, not having the right to land. Or
right.
Not,
It's a long conversation, so that's why I just wondered if you had any way to...
Well, that's why I'm not the one in Uganda teaching women how to empower themselves and advocate against the bank. It's Newat who's doing that. We work with local organizations in developing countries. I most recently got back from Kampala, and this is an organization that has the language to communicate these messages and to teach women what their rights are according to IFI accountability mechanisms and how to take gender discrimination claims to the inspection panel, for example, for World Bank investments, and to really have that dialogue. So yeah, we bridge the gap. That's how we bridge that gap.
The disparity on gender continues in many societies. And in Uganda, many people misunderstand gender to mean women. But the Minister of, in the beginning there was a Minister of Women. Then it was joined to the Minister of Gender. It was turned to a Minister of Gender and Social Development, so that people understand the aspects of gender don't mean only women, but the whole society. That it means access to cultural and political rights that include right to security, to movement, to education, and equally, not for women only or for men only, but on an equality principle. Because of that, the Constitution of Uganda has an equality principle within that Constitution, which says everything that goes on in marriage and families and property ownership and everything is equal. The practice is not so easy because you have to go back and explain. If I'm a man, do I have that equal principle as the woman? And in the villages, people look at it differently. But we keep telling them this is about equality. Uganda is a patriarchal society. So many men think you are taking away their power because now you want to be on the same standing. But the patriarchal roles continue. A man is still the head of the family in many societies. There are other society, other situations where you find many families are single-headed because of the